In 1630, in an age where steel decided fate and discipline defined survival, a young samurai named Kuji believed he had discovered the ultimate secret of strength: outwork everyone, endure more pain, and never stop pushing. Chosen from hundreds to train under Lord Tiyada's elite program, he treated every waking hour as a battlefield against weakness. 12 hours a day he trained with brutal intensity, denying himself rest, believing exhaustion was proof of honor and progress. He slept little, ate quickly, and ignored the warnings his body whispered to him. To Kuji, fatigue was not a signal, it was a challenge to be crushed. Yet after only 3 months, his body betrayed him in the most terrifying way possible. One morning, he woke unable to rise, not injured, not wounded, but utterly empty, as if someone had drained every drop of life from his veins overnight. At just 22 years old, his strength was gone, replaced by a hollow stillness that frightened him more than any enemy ever had. What confused him most was not his collapse, but the men around him. His instructors, warriors in their 50s and 60s, trained the same 12 hours each day. They rose before dawn, practiced relentlessly, and continued long after sunset, yet their eyes were sharp, their movements fluid, their presence calm and energized. They did not gasp for breath. They did not drag their feet. They did not crumble at night. While Kuji felt like a candle burned down to smoke, they looked like steady flames that never flickered. Kuji believed strength was physical, something carved into muscle and bone through suffering. He believed willpower meant forcing the body to obey no matter the cost. What he did not understand, what no one had ever taught him, was that energy is not created by effort alone. It is governed by the mind. His collapse was not a failure of discipline, nor a lack of talent. It was the inevitable result of bleeding energy through invisible psychological wounds he could not see. While he fought harder each day, his mind was scattered, tense, and constantly at war with itself. The masters, however, were not stronger because they endured more pain. They were stronger because they wasted nothing. They had learned 3 principles that controlled energy at its source, principles so subtle that most warriors never discovered them, and so powerful that those who did could train endlessly without collapse. Kuji stood at the edge of destruction, believing he was weak, when in truth he was ignorant. What happened next would decide whether he faded into failure or learned why true warriors do not burn themselves out. By the time he understood the truth, his entire view of effort, discipline, and strength would be shattered, and so would yours. When Kuji finally forced his eyes open that morning, the world felt unnaturally quiet. His body lay still on the tatami mat, not because he was injured, but because there was nothing left inside him to command it to move. He tried to sit up and felt no sharp pain, no torn muscle, no broken bone, only a deep, hollow emptiness, as if his strength had been quietly stolen while he slept. For the first time since entering Lord Tiyada's elite program, fear crept into his chest. This was not the honorable pain of training or the familiar burn of fatigue. This was something colder, something final. He was 22 years old, chosen for greatness, yet he felt older than the men who taught him. Each breath felt shallow, each thought heavy, as though even thinking required more energy than he possessed. When he eventually dragged himself outside, the training ground was already alive. Steel rang against steel. Feet struck the earth in disciplined rhythm. And there, among the younger students, stood the masters, gray-haired, weathered, calm, moving with effortless precision. Instructor Hideaki noticed him immediately. His voice cut through the morning air like a blade, sharp and unyielding. "You look like a corpse," he said, not unkindly, but without mercy. "When did you last feel alive?" Kuji straightened by instinct, forcing his legs to obey, though they trembled beneath him. He bowed and answered as he had been trained. "I am fine, sensei. Ready to train." The lie tasted bitter. Hideaki's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in understanding. "No," he replied quietly. "You are destroying yourself." At his command, Kuji sat, and the simple act of resting flooded him with relief so intense it nearly brought him to tears. Hideaki, a man well past 50, had already trained for hours before dawn and would train many more before nightfall. Yet his posture was relaxed, his breathing steady, his presence full. The contrast was humiliating. Hideaki asked Kuji to describe his routine, and Kuji spoke with pride at first, rising before sunrise, training without pause, studying technique, sleeping only 5 or 6 hours to maximize effort. To him, this was discipline. To Hideaki, it was a confession. "And how do you feel during training?" the master asked. Kuji hesitated, then admitted the truth. Every movement felt like pushing through water, every strike demanded immense effort, but he forced himself onward. Hideaki sighed, not in disappointment, but in sadness. "You confuse exhaustion with progress," he said. "You believe effort alone makes a warrior. That belief is killing you." The word struck deeper than any blow. Kuji had done everything he was taught, everything he believed was right, yet it had led him here, empty, failing, terrified. Hideaki leaned closer and spoke the truth Kuji had never heard: the problem is not your body. It is how your mind manages energy. In that moment, Kuji realized that his collapse was not a mystery. It was a warning. And unless he learned what the masters knew, it would happen again, until nothing remained. Hideaki did not lecture Kuji immediately. Instead, he motioned for him to follow and led him toward the main training ground, where dozens of samurai moved through their forms in disciplined silence. The morning mist still clung to the earth, and the rhythmic sound of blades cutting air filled the space. "Watch carefully," Hideaki said. He pointed to a young warrior near the center. The student's movements were sharp and technically correct, yet his face was tight, jaw clenched, shoulders raised with tension. Every strike looked forced, as though he were fighting an invisible opponent inside himself. "That is Takumi," Hideaki explained. "He trains exactly as you do." Then the master gestured toward another student nearby. This one moved through the same forms, the same sequence, yet his face was relaxed, his shoulders loose, his breath steady. There was power in his strikes, but no visible strain, no wasted motion. "And that is Riku," Hideaki continued. "They perform the same technique. Their bodies move in the same way. But their energy expenditure is completely different." Kuji watched more closely and began to see what he had missed all along. Takumi looked like he was pushing himself through every movement, while Riku seemed to be carried by the motion itself. Hideaki turned to Kuji. "Takumi will be exhausted within an hour. Riku can continue for 6. The realization struck Kuji like a sudden chill. If the movements were the same, then the difference could not be physical. It had to be internal. Hideaki nodded, as if reading his thoughts. "The difference is attention," he said. "Energy follows attention. Wherever the mind goes, energy flows." Kuji protested weakly that he was focused, that he gave everything to his training. Hideaki shook his head. "No," he replied. "You are focused on your thoughts about training, not on the training itself." He asked Kuji a simple question: when you swing your sword, is your mind fully on the sword, its weight, its balance, its movement through space, or is it on whether the strike is good enough, whether you are being watched, whether you are improving fast enough? Kuji felt his chest tighten. He knew the answer. His mind was never quiet. It judged every movement, compared him to others, replayed past mistakes, and worried constantly about the future. Hideaki's voice grew calm but firm. "Every thought that pulls you out of the present moment is an energy leak," he said. "One thought may seem small, but you carry hundreds of them at once. By the end of the day, you are empty." He explained that the masters did not possess more strength, they possessed more control. Their attention was unified, resting entirely in the present action. When the mind stopped scattering itself across fear, comparison, and expectation, the body no longer wastes energy compensating for mental chaos. Hideaki lowered his voice. "You have been bleeding energy all your life without knowing it," he said. "That is why you collapsed." For the first time, Kuji did not feel ashamed. He felt awakened. The cause of his failure was no longer mysterious or personal. It was a law of the mind he had never been taught. And if attention could drain energy, then perhaps, he realized with a surge of hope, it could also restore it. Kuji listened in silence as Hideaki let the truth settle between them. Then the master spoke again, his tone deliberate, as though laying the foundation of something that could not be rushed. If energy follows attention, he said, then the first skill you must master is attention itself. Kuji expected something complex, an advanced technique, a grueling exercise, but Hideaki's instruction was almost insulting in its simplicity. Before every training session, Kuji would sit for 5 minutes and do absolutely nothing. No sword. No movement. No effort. Just sit and watch his breath. When his attention wandered, he would notice it and gently bring it back. That was all. Kuji felt confusion rise inside him. 5 minutes of stillness seemed laughably insignificant compared to 12 hours of brutal training. How could something so small repair what months of effort had destroyed? Hideaki saw the doubt on his face and smiled faintly. Just watching the breath, he said, is harder than fighting 10 men with swords. Your mind will resist this more than any physical trial. Despite his skepticism, Kuji obeyed. Hideaki left him alone on the training ground and ordered him to begin immediately. Kuji sat, closed his eyes, and turned his attention inward. Within seconds, his mind betrayed him. Thoughts rushed in, what he would eat later, whether the masters were watching, how foolish he looked sitting still while others trained. He pulled his attention back to his breath, only for it to wander again almost instantly. The process repeated endlessly. 5 minutes stretched into what felt like an hour. His legs ached. His back tightened. His mind searched desperately for escape. Yet each time he noticed the wandering, he returned. When Hideaki returned, something subtle had changed. Kuji did not feel suddenly energized, but he felt less drained, as though a quiet leak had been sealed without him realizing it was there. How do you feel? Hideaki asked. Kuji struggled to find the right word. Lighter, he said finally. Clearer. Hideaki nodded. Good. That is the first principle beginning to work. Over the following days, the practice continued. At first, Kuji's attention wandered every few seconds. His mind was loud, chaotic, restless. But gradually, he began to notice sooner. He returned faster. And then, one day, something extraordinary happened. For a few brief seconds, there were no thoughts at all, only breath, presence, and stillness. In that silence, Kuji felt a clarity he had never known. When he rose and took up his sword, his movements felt different. He placed his full attention on the weight of the blade, the alignment of his body, the flow of motion itself. He did not think about being good or bad, watched or judged. The technique he had struggled with for weeks suddenly flowed with ease. Hideaki appeared beside him and spoke softly. When attention is unified, the body knows exactly what to do, he said. When attention is scattered, the body must compensate, and that compensation costs enormous energy. Kuji began to understand that his exhaustion had never come from training too much. It had come from training with a mind that was never truly present. By learning to place his attention fully in the moment, and nowhere else, he was not adding effort, but removing waste. For the first time, Kuji sensed that strength was not something to be forced, but something that emerged naturally when the mind stopped pulling itself apart. By the 5th day of his new practice, Kuji began to notice something that unsettled him more than his physical collapse ever had. During meditation, a single thought would appear, quiet at first, almost harmless. What if I fail the next test? The moment it arose, his body reacted instantly. His shoulders tightened, his breathing became shallow, and a faint heaviness settled into his chest. When the thought faded, the tension eased. The connection was undeniable. One thought had drained energy from his body as surely as an hour of hard training. After practice, Kuji approached Hideaki and described what he had seen. The master's eyes softened. "Now you are beginning to see clearly," he said. "Thoughts are not just ideas. They are commands to the nervous system." Hideaki explained that every thought triggers a physical response. Worry tightens muscles. Fear shortens breath. Judgment creates tension. Anticipation floods the body with stress hormones meant for survival, not endurance. Most people live in a constant storm of these reactions without ever noticing them. Kuji realized that his mind had been firing thousands of such commands every day, each one siphoning energy away. Hideaki drew a simple diagram in the dirt. In one column, scattered attention, worrying, comparing, judging, reliving the past, fearing the future. Only a small portion of energy went to the actual task. In the other column, unified attention, all energy directed into the present action. Most people give only a fraction of themselves to what they are doing, Hideaki said. The rest is wasted on mental noise. That is why they are always tired. During training, Kuji tested this understanding. When sparring, instead of calculating, judging, or fearing mistakes, he placed his attention entirely on what was in front of him, the movement of his opponent, the sound of breath, the feel of the ground beneath his feet. Something remarkable happened. His body responded faster, cleaner, without the lag of overthinking. When an opponent struck, there was no gap between perception and action. Block. Counter. Strike. Fluid and precise. Hideaki watched and nodded. "You just tasted Mushin," he said. "No mind." When attention is so unified that thought no longer interrupts action, energy expenditure drops to its minimum and effectiveness rises to its maximum. By the end of the week, Kuji realized that he was training the same hours as before, yet the exhaustion that once crushed him was gone. He still felt effort, still felt fatigue, but it no longer hollowed him out. There was energy left at the end of the day, something he had not felt in months. The only change was not in how long or how hard he trained, but in where his attention rested. 5 minutes of watching his breath before each session had trained his mind to stay where his body was. Hideaki made the lesson unmistakably clear. "This is only the first principle," he said. "Energy follows attention. Master your attention, and you stop the leaks. Fail to do so, and no amount of rest will save you." Kuji bowed deeply. For the first time, he understood that discipline was not about forcing the body forward at all costs. It was about guiding the mind with precision. And although he felt stronger than he had in months, Hideaki's final words reminded him that this was only the beginning. "Tomorrow," the master said, "you will learn the second principle. And it will challenge everything you believe about pain, effort, and endurance." The next morning, Hideaki did not hand Kuji a sword. Instead, he placed a heavy wooden bucket filled to the brim with water in front of him. "Hold this at arm's length," he said, "and do not move." The task seemed simple, almost insulting compared to the intensity of their usual training. Kuji lifted the bucket, arms extended. Within seconds, his shoulders began to burn. After half a minute, his muscles trembled violently. At 1 minute, pain screamed through his arms, sharp and merciless. His jaw clenched. His breath shortened. At 90 seconds, he could no longer endure it and dropped the bucket, gasping. Hideaki looked at him calmly. "How did that feel?" he asked. "Exhausting," Kuji replied. "Painful." Hideaki nodded. "Now you will do it again. But this time, do not resist the sensation." Kuji frowned. "Do not wish it to stop. Do not tense against it. Do not argue with the pain. Simply feel it exactly as it is." Skeptical but obedient, Kuji lifted the bucket again. The burning returned immediately, but instead of tightening his body and cursing the discomfort, he observed it. He noticed where the sensation lived, how it pulsed, how it rose and fell. He did not tell himself it was unbearable. He did not demand that it end. He accepted it. To his astonishment, the pain was still there, but something else had changed. The suffering, the frantic mental struggle against the sensation, had diminished. His breath steadied. His body softened instead of fighting itself. When he finally dropped the bucket, more than 2 minutes had passed. Kuji stared at his arms in disbelief. "What just happened?" he asked. Hideaki smiled. "You discovered the second principle," he said. "Resistance creates exhaustion." He explained that pain and suffering are not the same. Pain is a physical sensation. Suffering is the mental resistance to that sensation. When Kuji resisted the burn, his nervous system interpreted it as a threat, flooding his body with stress hormones and draining energy rapidly. When he accepted it, the threat vanished. The sensation remained, but the energy drain did not. Hideaki drew another diagram in the dirt. Discomfort plus resistance equaled total exhaustion. Discomfort plus acceptance equaled manageable effort. Most warriors, Hideaki said, spend far more energy fighting discomfort than enduring it. Over the next days, Kuji applied this lesson everywhere. During brutal drills, when his legs screamed and lungs burned, he noticed the old thoughts arise: "This is too hard. I can't keep going. This shouldn't be like this." Each thought drained him. Then he replaced them with acceptance: "This is discomfort. It is here. I allow it." The pain did not disappear, but his energy no longer collapsed. He trained longer, steadier, without the familiar crash. Hideaki expanded the lesson beyond physical pain. Resistance was not limited to aching muscles. It appeared whenever Kuji argued with reality, when the weather was harsh, when a technique felt impossible, when a training partner outmatched him. Every complaint, every silent protest, triggered the same exhausting stress response. Accepting reality is not weakness, Hideaki said. It is intelligence. Reality does not change because you argue with it. But your energy disappears when you do. For the first time, Kuji understood why the older masters endured what younger warriors could not. They did not possess stronger bodies. They had simply stopped wasting energy fighting what already was. As the days passed, Kuji began to recognize resistance everywhere, not just in pain, but in the quiet, habitual ways his mind pushed against reality. Hideaki made this unmistakably clear during a sparring session with Dai, a senior student whose skill far surpassed Kuji's. In the past, this mismatch would have ignited frustration, envy, and a constant inner dialogue about inadequacy. Each strike Kuji failed to block would have carried a second blow: "I should be better than this, why am I still losing, this isn't fair." This time, as Dai attacked with relentless precision, Kuji noticed the old thoughts rising and let them dissolve. "Dai is better than me," he told himself calmly. That is reality. The moment he stopped resisting the gap between where he was and where he wanted to be, something profound shifted. He no longer wasted energy on comparison or resentment. He observed. He learned. He accepted the hits he could not prevent and adjusted where he could. The match was just as demanding, but when it ended, Kuji was not drained. He felt alert, curious, alive. Hideaki watched closely and nodded in approval. "You just did what takes most students years to understand," he said. "You stopped resisting your position in reality." Later that day, Hideaki explained the deeper mechanism behind what Kuji had experienced. When a person resists reality, whether it is pain, failure, heat, criticism, or limitation, the nervous system interprets that resistance as danger. Danger triggers a stress response. Stress floods the body with cortisol and adrenaline, chemicals designed for short bursts of survival, not long-term endurance. Most people live in this state constantly, activating survival mode over trivial discomforts and unmet expectations. Their bodies never return to balance. Their energy never replenishes. Acceptance, Hideaki explained, sends a different message to the nervous system: there is no threat here. When that message is received, the body remains calm even under strain. Energy is conserved. Strength endures. Over the following days, Kuji practiced acceptance deliberately. When the sun beat down mercilessly during training, he noted the fact, "It is hot," without adding the complaint, "This shouldn't be happening." When his legs shook with fatigue, he acknowledged the sensation without labeling it as unbearable. When corrected harshly by an instructor, he absorbed the information without resisting the tone. Each time, he felt the difference immediately. The task remained difficult, but the exhaustion no longer compounded itself. Hideaki summarized the lesson with brutal clarity. "Most men are not tired because life is hard," he said. "They are tired because they are constantly arguing with the fact that life is hard." Kuji understood now why the old masters could train for endless hours. They were not immune to discomfort. They simply did not waste energy fighting it. By removing resistance, they removed the greatest drain on endurance. Kuji felt something he had never felt before during training, not ease, not comfort, but stability. His energy no longer rose and crashed violently. It flowed steadily, like a river no longer blocked by stones. And with that realization, he sensed that one final lesson remained, something quieter, subtler, yet just as powerful, waiting to be revealed. Hideaki introduced the third principle without ceremony. There was no speech, no warning, no dramatic explanation. He simply stood in the center of the training hall and became completely still. No shifting of weight. No adjustment of clothing. No movement in his face or hands. The silence felt heavy, almost uncomfortable, as if something invisible were gathering in the space around him. Kuji watched closely and felt an unexpected sensation. Hideaki's presence seemed stronger in stillness than it ever had in motion. When the master finally spoke, his voice was calm and controlled. "What do you feel?" he asked. Kuji searched for the right word. "Contained," he said. "Powerful." Hideaki nodded. "That is because stillness generates power." He explained that most people believe strength comes from constant motion, constant effort, constant doing. Modern thinking worships busyness. But warriors who survive long campaigns learn something different. Unnecessary movement leaks energy. Unnecessary tension leaks energy. Unnecessary thought leaks energy. Hideaki demonstrated a kata, each movement precise and minimal, followed by perfect stillness. There was no rush to the next action, no residual tension carried forward. Then he asked a younger student to perform the same form. The student was skilled, but Kuji saw the difference instantly: small fidgets between movements, subtle tightening of the shoulders, a restless face. "Same kata," Hideaki said. "Very different energy cost." He explained that the body recovers not only during sleep, but in the spaces between effort. Stillness allows the nervous system to shift into restoration even while training continues. Without those moments, energy drains relentlessly. Kuji began his stillness practice that day. 5 minutes of sitting without focusing on the breath, without meditating on anything, just being completely still. It was far more difficult than it sounded. His nose itched. His legs begged to shift. His mind screamed for stimulation. Every instinct urged him to move, to adjust, to do something. Hideaki later explained why. "Your nervous system is addicted to stimulation," he said. Stillness feels like danger because modern life has trained you to fear silence. Yet beneath the discomfort, something else emerged. When Kuji remained still despite the urge to move, his breath deepened on its own. His muscles softened. A subtle warmth spread through his body. Over the next days, Hideaki explained the science behind the experience. The body has two primary modes, action and restoration. Most warriors, and most people, live almost entirely in action mode. They never fully restore, even when they rest. Stillness activates the restorative system, lowering stress hormones and rebuilding energy reserves. The old masters, Hideaki said, did not train endlessly through brute endurance. They trained with rhythm, intense action followed by complete stillness. Kuji began applying this during training. Between repetitions, he stood motionless. Between drills, he sat quietly instead of pacing. Between corrections, he allowed his mind to go blank rather than rehearse mistakes. The effect was immediate and profound. After 2 hours of training, he felt fresher than he once had after 30 minutes. He realized that power was not something you squeezed out of the body. It was something you allowed to accumulate when you stopped leaking it. Stillness, once feared, became a source of quiet strength. As Kuji continued his stillness training, Hideaki introduced the final step, integrating all three principles into a single, seamless approach. You have learned that energy follows attention, that resistance creates exhaustion, and that stillness generates power, Hideaki said. Now it is time to combine them. Kuji's first attempt was clumsy. During a complex kata, he tried to maintain unified attention while also accepting discomfort and staying still in the gaps between movements. His mind raced. His body tensed. He stumbled several times, frustrated that mastery did not come instantly. Hideaki simply observed and offered no correction. Patience, he said. Integration is learned through practice, not instruction. Over the next several days, Kuji persisted. He began each session with 5 minutes of focused breath awareness. When his attention wandered, he gently returned it. During drills, he noticed sensations of fatigue, heat, and discomfort, and instead of resisting, he acknowledged them fully, without judgment, without complaint. Between each movement, each repetition, he practiced stillness, allowing his body and mind to rest briefly before the next effort. Slowly, the difference became apparent. Movements that had once required enormous effort now flowed with precision. Strikes were stronger, faster, more controlled. His energy no longer rose and fell unpredictably. Instead, it was steady, sustainable, abundant. Hideaki explained the subtle mechanics behind this transformation. Unified attention prevented leaks, acceptance stopped unnecessary stress, stillness allowed energy to regenerate in the spaces between effort. When all three were applied simultaneously, the body could endure what previously seemed impossible. By the end of 2 weeks, Kuji performed a full 12-hour training cycle, the same regimen that had left him collapsed, trembling, and depleted 3 weeks prior. This time, he felt effort, but not exhaustion. He felt challenge, but not depletion. He had energy left at the end of the day. Hideaki watched carefully and finally spoke. You have discovered what took me 20 years to understand. Energy is not a physical commodity. It is a psychological one. Master your mind, and you master your energy. Kuji's mind reeled as the truth sank in. All the young samurai around him were struggling, pushing themselves to the point of collapse, believing that exhaustion equaled progress. And yet, here he was, doing the same work, sweating as much, moving as fast, and still retaining strength and clarity. It was not his body that had changed, it was his understanding, his focus, his method of interacting with effort, reality, and time itself. This is the essence of mastery, Hideaki said. Not brute force, not pain tolerance, not relentless motion. It is control, awareness, and rhythm. The old masters were not superhuman. They simply stopped wasting energy on thoughtless effort, resistance, and restless motion. Kuji reflected on how often he had trained without attention, fought against sensations, and never allowed stillness between repetitions. He realized that the exhaustion he had blamed on his own weakness or on the rigor of the dojo had been entirely unnecessary. It had been self-inflicted through ignorance of these principles. And as he internalized the lesson, Kuji understood that this knowledge extended far beyond the dojo. Every person, everywhere, mismanaged energy in similar ways, through scattered attention, resistance to reality, and restless movement. The ancient samurai had discovered a timeless truth: the mind, not the muscles, governs endurance. The body follows the instructions of consciousness, and consciousness could be trained to conserve, channel, and regenerate energy. With that understanding, Kuji felt a sense of liberation. Effort no longer felt like drudgery, it became an expression of focus and presence. Discomfort no longer drained him, it became a teacher. Moments of stillness, once frightening, became restorative sanctuaries between action. He realized that mastery of energy was more powerful than mastery of technique alone. And with this knowledge, he was no longer merely a student. He was beginning to become a warrior in the truest sense, capable of enduring, performing, and thriving under conditions that had once crushed him completely. Years later, Kuji stood before a new generation of young samurai, his body strong but his mind sharper still. Many of these students looked exhausted before the day had even begun, their eyes heavy with fatigue, their movements sluggish, their focus scattered. Kuji recognized the familiar pattern immediately, the same mistakes he had once made. He raised a hand and asked, "How many of you feel tired all the time?" Every hand shot up. "And how many of you believe that the solution is to rest more, sleep more, or do less?" he continued. Again, most hands rose. Kuji shook his head gently. "You are all wrong," he said. "Your exhaustion is not from doing too much. It is from mismanaging your energy." He demonstrated a simple kata and then asked each student where their attention had been. Eyes widened and heads shifted uncomfortably as students admitted it had wandered, worrying about mistakes, comparing themselves to peers, thinking of what they should have done yesterday or what awaited them tomorrow. Scattered attention, Kuji said, means scattered energy. That is why even simple movements leave you drained. He then introduced them to the three principles he had learned under Hideaki. First, energy follows attention; second, resistance creates exhaustion; and third, stillness generates power. He explained the practices with clarity and precision. Each morning, sit for 5 minutes and observe your breath, noticing when attention wanders and gently returning it. During training and life, notice whenever you resist reality, traffic, mistakes, discomfort, limitations, and consciously accept the facts as they are. Between actions, allow complete stillness, even briefly, to let energy rebuild. One student hesitated. "Does this really work outside the dojo?" Kuji smiled. "Watch yourself in daily life. Are you present in conversations, at work, or even while walking? Or is your mind scattered across a dozen concerns? Each distraction leaks energy. Are you fighting reality at every turn, wishing life were different, resenting circumstances? That resistance drains you. And when you allow stillness, even for brief moments, your energy regenerates." He paused and let the lesson sink in. "Master these three principles," he said, "and you master your energy anywhere, at any time. Not because your body is stronger than others, but because you have learned to stop wasting energy on psychological patterns that do not serve you." He explained that modern science now confirmed what the samurai had known empirically. Neuroscience shows that attention cannot be truly divided, multitasking is rapid switching that wastes energy. Stress response research demonstrates that resistance to reality triggers hormone cascades that deplete energy. Studies on rest and meditation confirm that stillness activates the parasympathetic nervous system, rebuilding reserves. The lessons Kuji had learned 400 years ago under Hideaki were not just philosophical, they were biological truths, validated by modern experiments. He encouraged his students to begin simply, 5 minutes each morning observing the breath, noticing attention drift and returning it. During the day, notice resistance and accept reality as it is. Between tasks, pause, be still, even for half a minute. This, he explained, was enough to begin reclaiming energy, even in a world that demanded constant action. Finally, he left them with the core message: energy is not a fixed resource, it is something you manage. Most people mismanage it continuously, scattered attention, constant resistance, zero stillness, and end up exhausted not from doing too much, but from managing it poorly. The samurai discovered the path to mastery centuries ago, and the principles remain unchanged. Kuji's eyes swept across the students' faces. Some looked skeptical, some curious, some inspired. "The question," he said, "is not whether these principles work. They do. Science, history, and your own experience will prove it. The question is, will you apply them? Or will you continue to scatter attention, resist reality, and avoid stillness, wondering why you are always tired? He paused, letting the silence underscore the weight of his words. Start tomorrow, he said softly, with 5 minutes of focused breath. That is the beginning. Master your energy, and you master your life. And with that, Kuji stepped back, leaving the students to reflect, to experiment, and to begin the journey of transforming how they lived, acted, and conserved the most precious resource they had, their own energy.